Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I have a bilateral significant hearing impairment, which is a clinical way of saying that child is deaf, okay? So good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you so much. I am absolutely thrilled to be here to share with you. I want to say thank you certainly to Dr. Ishmael and to Dr. Guardiola. So glad to see our newest director of our local office of minority health, Ms. Holly, and certainly Ms. Shannon. We are always happy for the opportunity, but I want to say to Dr. Guardiola, thank you. It's a real man that will give up his parking space for you. Amen? So, circling around, trying to find a parking space. And he came out and sacrificed his parking space. Well, I say thank you. I recognize the fact that you could have gotten anyone to come and share with you today. I want you to know that I am honored that you decided to come into this class. How many of you get extra credit for this? Let's pretend. Okay. And how many of you are headed in about 45 minutes to a test? All right, raise your hands high. All right, I'm just going. Okay, you got it. Okay. But certainly, thank you. How many public health majors do I have in here? Okay. Raise your hands again, I'm sorry. Psychology? Social work? Pre-med? I'm just here. What other majors are in the room?
Nursing.
Nursing. Raise your hands. Oh, wonderful. Thank you. I hope I covered everyone. I want you to be clear that all of you, I am compelling you to be public health advocates. I need you to be public health advocates. So I know that we're here to talk about the issue of disparities and equity, but I need you to be able to talk and in your fields, in your profession. In fact, before you even graduate, I want you to be able to begin to challenge this system that you are in. So college is where you practice. At Wright State University, it was me who stood on the table in the Rathskeller pub because I refused to allow them to play Birth of a Nation. So I stood on the table and said, you'll show it on me. But nobody's watching this film tonight. It was me who protested in the middle of the quad because they were trying to take away our cultural student center. So I'm saying to you that you need to challenge your systems while you're here. This is where you practice. Because if you won't fight for a grade, you'll never fight when someone's paying you. And so I need you to practice challenging systems. How many of you want courses that would better prepare you to work with the populations that you're going to be dealing with? So I'm challenging this university. Now, they may not invite me back again, but I might now. So I want you to challenge a university to offer classes in disparities, classes on equity, classes on implicit bias. I want you to be able to arm yourself with some weapons so when you go out and talk with individuals who are not like you, you've got a skill set to get them to a goal, a skill set to get them to where they are trying to be. My greatest achievement, and by the way, I am a licensed professional counselor, so my background is human services and behavioral health specifically. And yes, my license is still in effect. Mailed my 30 hours and my fee because I'm always going to be a servant. I'm always going to be a clinician. But my greatest achievement as a clinician was when my client, who was an Aryan skinhead, actually hugged me at graduation. When he enrolled in the course, and I knew the judge who sent him to our agency, I ran an outpatient drug treatment agency for 20 years in Columbus, Ohio. I know this is where you say, girl, you look good. So when I say that again, you know what I say, what? You look good. So part of my goal, my quest, was to be as effective as I could be with my polar opposite. So when he came to the treatment agency for his assessment, he came and said, I don't want to end for a counselor, fill in the blank. And I said, you are not. Nobody works here that is one. So I began working with him because I had to leave my stuff at the door in order to really get him free of cocaine use. So we had to help each other get over some stuff, some issues, some implicit bias, if you will. So when graduation came and his parents were present, trust me, I was doing this with the graduation certificate. Thank you. Thank you. Congratulations. And he picked me up and turned me around. I'm going, what's going on? But he said in the presence of his parents, I had to cut the umbilical cord of my youth teaching in order to see and hear you for who and what you were. Because without you, I would not have a possibility of life. Without you, I would have not been able to move on. So here was my spiritual polar opposite, gender polar opposite. He was just different as different could be from me. Here I am, fried, dyed, Baptist, showed up, and he's an atheist. I am an African American. He is a white male. So your quest is, what knowledge can I gain so that I can better myself to be able to serve people who are my polar opposites? That's when you know you've arrived at a skill set. Yes, I work excellent with African American females. Ooh. I have 8 sisters. Yes, of course I can work with someone like me. But how effective will you be with someone who is not like you? So that is your quest. So as we journey in this presentation, I want you to understand that in order to be a health advocate, in order to have impact, you've got to burn the midnight oil. And you got to go beyond what they teach you at this campus. Because everything you need to know may not be in the curriculum. Everything you need to know about who you are may not be in coursework. So some of the work you have to do is on you, and some of the work you have to do is when you read a book by someone who is an author. When someone is writing a book, make sure that the author is of the population group that you're reading about. Make sure that you are understanding your sources. So again, thank you again for allowing me to come and share. Sharing briefly, who's my timekeeper? Okay, all right. Give me my warning. Really coming to talk with you about eliminating disparities and how we advance health equity. And so this whole notion, the Commission on Minority Health has been around since 1987, and we actually came into being before the Federal Office of Minority Health. So long before HHS had their Office of Minority Health, the Commission on Minority Health predated that. And so we were the first state agency in the nation set aside to really look at the health differences, the disparity differences between non-minority and minority populations. And so in 1985, the Secretary's Task Force on Black and Minority Health, Margaret Hepler. How many of you are familiar with Margaret Hepler report? Okay, look around the room. Okay. Remember I said you got to read some stuff outside of school? So you're going to have to read some things outside of the coursework. But this report came out in 1985, and she noticed some patterns that despite the fact that we were advancing in medicine and technology, we still had racial and ethnic minorities who were not benefiting from that science. And so we began to look at the issue of racial and ethnic health disparities. One, we know that they are multifactorial and complex, but we also know the major factors really are about inadequate access to care. Certainly, if you can't get to health care, that's a problem, and it's difficult to stay healthy. Now, I know you're young, I get it, and you feel invincible, but one day you're going to get older, and you're going to need access to care. Also, poor utilization of care. But this is really the driver as well. Substandard quality of care, we'll talk about that in a minute, as well as socioeconomic status. How many of you would agree, and it's not a leap of your judgment, that when you are poor, it's difficult to be healthy? Raise your hand if you can agree with that basic statement. When you're poor, it is difficult to be healthy. It's difficult when you don't have access, but it actually takes money to buy medication. And so many of you may have individuals in your families that are making decisions about breaking pills in half because they simply cannot afford medication. But we also know that the future health of this nation will basically be determined by how effectively we work with all populations, so both non-minority and minority populations. Because if you don't deal with the people who are experiencing the burden of death, disease, and disability, you'll never move the proverbial needle. So let's talk about some national health disparities. And let's say, when we take a look at the Latino population, we know that Latinos are 65% more likely to be diabetic. African Americans are 40% more likely to die from a stroke. Native Americans, 15% more likely to have heart disease, and Asian American Pacific Islanders, 80% more likely to die from liver cancer. These are preventable diseases. I want to remind you of that. But let's not just look at national, let's look at what's happening here in Ohio. So this is the 2015 Chronic Disease Report from the Ohio Department of Health, looking at the impact of chronic disease. Medical costs associated with these diseases, chronic diseases, are expected to rise from 25 what? That says what? In 2010 to how much? 44. In 2020, this is what year? Okay, I just had to check. So this is not about do we have money. We have money. It's just what we are choosing to spend it on. So in Ohio, related to heart disease, in 2012, Hispanics had the highest prevalence of heart disease. Now I want you to remember the percentage of the population of Latinos in this state, and for them to carry the highest prevalence is a problem. But let's look at diabetes. So let's just guess. So blacks in Ohio die from diabetes at what percentage rate die from diabetes? What percentage rate higher than whites? Yes. Give me some percentages. Hello? 40. Are we about to take a test? So give me some percentages, yes. What percent higher? 6. Okay, very good. 79% higher death rate, age-adjusted death rate. We're dying from a preventable disease at a 79% higher percentage rate. This is a problem. So we have to look back historically. So when you think about that Heckler report that was produced in what year?
85.
Very good. So in 1985, the Heckler report was produced. In 1899, what year? Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois did a study called the Philadelphia Negro in 1899. where he was able to look at the correlation between social conditions and the impact of health. This study was called the Philadelphia Negro. It was called the Philadelphia Negro because that was the language we used back then. So he was able to draw the correlation between physical and social environment and health outcomes. What you now, my public health majors, call what? Social, what? Determinants of health. So that was what year? 1899. Oh, good thing. In 1999, 100 years later, Congress issues a study because Congress said, let's find out if that 1985 report was true. Warning, when something has been occurring and it is proven and evident, and they say, let's do a study. Now, how many of you know people are dying because you're going to the homeless, you're going to the services of memory, you're going to the mosque, you're going to the temples, you're saying goodbye. So you know people are dying. So a study was issued basically to look at the extent of racial and ethnic health disparities in healthcare and look at potential intervention strategies. But the study committee was struck by what they found. Because what they found is the research indicated that what? Minorities are less likely than whites to receive needed services. What's this next thing say? Including clinically necessary procedures. Stop. This means when I go in for a procedure, things are supposed to happen. If I break my ankle, there's a medical process and a procedure for repairing that. If I have heart disease and I'm having a heart attack, there's a process and a procedure. It's a clinically necessary procedure. But even when we look at access-related factors, because the first thing people think of, they didn't have insurance. No, this is even when we had insurance. So this is a problem, and the research, this is the Institute of Medicine. You don't go any higher than that in this country. This is the Institute of Medicine. And what they found was that African Americans and Hispanics tend to receive a what? I have a hearing impairment. Okay. So a lower quality of health care across a range of diseases, including what? Cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, mental health, and other chronic and infectious diseases. Okay, that covers it all, right? But then we found that disparities are also found even when clinical factors, such as stage of disease presentations, because they're not comparing stage 1 cancer to stage 4 cancer. This is same breast, white female, African American, stage 1 breast cancer, stage 1, left breast. We're just doing everything is the same. It's a head-to-head study. And they said even when those issues, age and disease, are taken into account, still there are differences. And the disparities in care are associated with higher mortality rates. Because if you don't get the care you're supposed to get, you're going to die. Point blank, period. And these disparities are found across a range of clinics. It didn't matter if it was a public hospital or a private hospital, teaching or non-teaching, it's real. So these are called health care disparities. These are disparities that happen even when you have good insurance, even when you go early in your disease presentation, even when all the access factors are related. All are taken into consideration. So these are healthcare disparities. So these things happen every day. So 2 years ago, I go for my annual checkup, and this is my annual physical. My doctor wasn't in. I had to see a partner in the office. No problem. I see a physician, and we go through the whole process, and then I tell her I prefer to get blood taken from my right arm. How many of you got a preference on where they draw? I want this arm. I'm stronger somehow in this arm, and the needle hurts less. I know it doesn't make sense, but that's my preference. So she says to me, "No, we're not going to take blood today. because your numbers look good. I tell her, I know my numbers look good. I work for my numbers to look good. This is not by accident. I'm hustling. I'm exercising. I'm eating right. She says, no, we're not going to take the blood. I said, no, I'm sorry, this is my annual physical. So blood draw is a clinically necessary procedure. And she said, no, and I said, okay, do you realize that when you don't take my blood work, my carnal health system will get a HEDIS score demerit, and there will be a financial penalty once this goes through the process. And she said, HEDIS who? And so I said, tell you what is your nationality? And she says, I'm Chinese. Good. Do you know the top 10 things Chinese women die from? And do you know the top 10 things African American women die from? And do you know how those things are detected in blood work? So needless to say, we go back and forth, and then I just drop the mic and say, I'm shutting this down, I'm not leaving, and you won't be seeing anyone else until what? You take my blood. Turns out I had high thyroid issues. Now imagine, had I taken it as a compliment, oh thanks, and not gotten my clinically necessary procedure, I would have left, and then I would have had high thyroid issues for a whole year before the next time I would have gotten the what? Blood draw. And so again, so that is a clinically necessary procedure. How many of you knew I wrote a letter? How many of you knew I requested her to have training? How many of you know when that training wasn't given? How many of you know I met a new doctor? Okay? Because we have to make sure that we are giving individuals the ability to speak up and speak out. So the Institute of Medicine did the study. Then Congress created the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. Where are my public health majors again? Raise your hands, okay? How many of you have read any of these reports? Okay, look around the room. Okay, university, I'm saying to you, these reports need to be a part of the research and the data that they are looking at, the studies that they are looking at. We have to know this data. This entity is put together simply to monitor disparities in the nation. They put out dashboard reports for every state. You can look and see how your state is doing on any number of chronic diseases, from acute care to preventative care. And so you really need to be looking at this report. And so when we look at the average differences in quality of care for Blacks, Hispanics, and Asians compared to whites by state, you see where Ohio is? You see what that says? So that says the what? Fourth and worst quartile. So this is showing how we are doing. So when we're not doing better, it ends up with something called a death, okay? So part of what we have to do is to make sure that we are doing better. These health inequities, these social determinants of health, and social determinants of health is the distribution. These are the things you need to stay healthy. Transportation, safe housing, food access. So you have to have these things to stay healthy. But health disparities are referred to as health inequities when they are what? The result of systemic and unjust distribution of resources. So I'm going to give you some history. So we know that social determinants of health are life enhancers. These are just the things that you need, but it also determines the quality of your life. So these are the social conditions in which people are born, live, work, play, pray, and they determine your life expectancy. But what really creates health? What influences health? These are the modifiable factors. So you see this 10% clinical care? That's where 95% of Ohio's healthcare budget goes. 95% of the healthcare budget goes here. 5% goes for prevention. So that's why I'm always downtown in Columbus, raising Cain and Abel, so that I can bring attention to the fact that we really have to reallocate our funding differently to get different results. But you can see that 40% plus the 10% of the physical environment account for 50% of really what influences health. So I want you to look at these two trees. Both of these neighborhoods have the same diseases. They have the same diseases. It's heart disease in both, HIV/AIDS, it's violence in both neighborhoods. However, when inequities are high and community assets low, the health outcomes are worse. So this community cannot support these diseases because the roots of the tree, such as poverty, segregation, and again, we have institutionalized racism and discrimination, poor quality schools, fragmented systems, disempowered members. So the tree isn't healthy to support disease. Diseases will be in communities. This is not about eliminating disease, it's about eliminating the disparity in the disease. So this community is healthy, same diseases, but there's a sense of community. We have people who are empowered, that have political influence, high quality schools. We have adequate income, quality housing, access to food. You get the picture. But these social determinants of health dictate whether we have opportunity rich or opportunity poor. So the Curtin Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity is at Ohio State University. And so they look at communities and see where are these social determinants of health and how did it start. And so oftentimes people think these issues they just started today. These things are rooted in policy. So when you look at this great city of Toledo, and you look at this map of Toledo, you see these areas of Toledo, but they just didn't become impoverished overnight. So when we look at the historical drivers of racial segregation or social isolation for communities of color, we look at this issue and look at how did this issue start? How did we get here? So when we had redlining, how many of you are familiar with the term redlining? Very good. So this is, and we'll talk about that in a second. So redlining is literally when they drew a red line around a community and deemed at the federal level we were not going to invest and allow mortgage purchases in this specific area. Most states had 3 or 4, Ohio had 17. Okay, so when we look at the issue of redlining or zoning land use, how many of you have noticed that in poor neighborhoods you tend to see factories? So that's not by accident, that's a policy. That means someone zoned that area appropriate for that type of factory to be there. We have urban renewal issues, explicit racial discrimination, which ends in segregation. And so we use these red line areas, this neighborhood. This is what happens when there's disinvestment in a community. It has a cycle. So it could have been redlined back in the 50s. How many of you ever heard of a movie called Raisin in the Sun? That's an example of a red line area. That's an example of when you weren't allowed to buy. So the family had to have a white male purchase the house so that they could move into the home because they were not going to be able to purchase that home if they just presented and said, we want to buy the home. And so these communities, when systemic disinvestment happens, housing goes down, streets aren't repaired, predatory lending. How many of you have heard of prime loans or subprime, where the new name is subprime? Okay, so many of us have gotten caught up in those schemes, if you will. And so there's a loss of property value. When property value goes down, is it a hard stretch to know that crime is going to move in? That's not difficult to imagine. So You have crime, you have foreclosure, you have assets going down a dwindling base. So when we look at Toledo and infant mortality, here is where redlining occurred historically in Toledo, Ohio, okay? You recognize some of those neighborhoods from the map? Here's where infant mortality is. So I want you to recognize that this happened in the 40s and the 50s, right? This is an old practice. Do you see where infant mortality is? It's still in the same communities, because just because a practice has gone away does not mean the policies do not still have impact in terms of health outcomes. And so when we look at how that impacts the value of what is happening in Ohio, we look at this 2019 Health Value Dashboard. Yes, that's something else I want you to read, I know. I'm adding more work. This is a composite measure of how much Ohio spends on healthcare and what we get in return. So it's a composite measure of population health and healthcare spending. So Ohio is ranked 46 in the nation. 46 in the nation out of 50 states. 46 in the nation for health value. This is a system you build a career in. Now I want you to stay in Ohio. I want you to be clear. I need help. I need help from everybody in this room. So I want you to stay in Ohio. But you need to understand, Ohio is on that bottom quartile for population health and for health value. And why do we rank so poorly? I'm so glad you asked. Access to care. Here's where we rank. Can you see how well we do in access to care? We have some of the best hospital systems in this country. We've got hospital systems, we've got ranking Nationwide Children's Hospital, the Cleveland Clinic, we've got Case Western, we've got phenomenal healthcare systems. So access to care, we rank well. Do you see where we're at in social and economic environment? And then our healthcare system, then the physical environment, and then what? Prevention, public health and prevention. So you need to understand, back to these modifiable factors. So do you see where we are related to these issues? So here's what we know. Too many Ohioans are being left behind, point blank. So for adverse childhood experiences, we're 38. So this is from birth to adulthood. This is life course. Childhood poverty, okay? We look at preschool enrollment, graduation rates, some college, adult incarceration, unemployment. These things all impact health outcomes. 10% is what is a modifiable factor for clinical care. So think about it. How much of your life have you spent in a doctor's office? At your age, not much. So we are pouring so many of our resources into what has very limited influence. So access to care is important, but it's not sufficient. We have to really begin to impact other areas. Health equity. What is health equity? It's when everyone has the opportunity to have optimal health. Because when we don't have that, when everyone has the ability to achieve their full potential, whether that is removing obstacles out of the way, historic obstacles or current obstacles, this is what health equity does, is generally look at reducing and ultimately eliminating disparities. We do that through a process of involvement with our communities. These are also movies and resources that I think would be beneficial because we can close a gap in a generation. So we know that access to care is necessary, but it's not sufficient. So we have to have improvement in factors beyond medical care. So when we look at infant mortality, in Ohio, African American infants die at a 3 times the rate of white infants. Now, the infant has not smoked. They're not, you can't say they're not eating right. This is infants who die before the age of 1. Many of you, it's impossible for someone in this room not to have been affected. Someone in this room knows someone who had a child who died before the age of 1. I know it's statistically impossible for it not to happen with as many of you that are in here today. So when we look at priority populations, we have to focus on the populations that's experiencing the highest disparity. We have to prioritize housing and employment, because if the child is not in safe housing, they may have been born at a proper way, born full term, but they still are not safe. And so we know that preterm birth costs 2/3 of the entire budget for what the state of Ohio's Medicaid spent. Preterm birth costs $373 million out of $579 million. We have to spend differently. We've done a great deal of work on raising the awareness of infant mortality. We've created legislative champions trying to expand what impacts health. And we know that we have, at the commission, developed the support and the scaling of an effective model that addresses social determinants of health. And so that model is really designed to make sure that we are addressing the issues that matter in that high-risk pregnant woman's life. And so we also know that that model has a return on investment. So we're not going to invest in something where we can't get funding back. So we have done a lot of legislative work, a lot of policy work to really create a report that actually put things into law to make sure that funding is set aside specifically to address this issue. So we know that part of what we are trying to do is to demonstrate to the legislature that we have to be able to implement models that are designed to address the populations that bear the burden of death, disease, and disability. And these are just some of the results. So you remember those numbers you saw? These are just some of the results where we are able to show improvement. But I want to challenge you to be health advocates. I want you to be able to speak up for individuals who cannot speak for themselves. But to do that, you've got to know the information. To do that, you've got to do some more reading, because if the university will not teach what you need to know, on one hand, you need to demand it, but on the other hand, it does not excuse you from needing to know the data. And so we want you to speak on behalf of others so that you can get them the resources that they need. So you generally have come into your profession, this major, what you are wanting to do, because you're trying to help improve access. Maybe you have a commitment to removing barriers. Maybe you want to improve people's ability to be healthy or have mental stability, or simply to be able to impact issues of poverty, safety, improve social environment, wherever and whatever. Maybe you said, I just want to help somebody. I've always wanted to help people. And this is why I want to be a social worker. This is why I want to be a nurse or a public health professional. Maybe that's why you came. But I'm challenging you to be able to have the data to make an impact and a difference where you are. And I'm saying to you, challenge this university. You are here. If you're not getting what you need to make a demand for it. If you won't fight when a paycheck's not involved, you never will when a paycheck is. So if there are courses that you need, if there's exposure that you need for populations, many of you are going to go and work with people that you have never, ever had a great deal of close contact with. So you've got to be culturally competent. You've got to be able to be effective with your polar opposite. You have to challenge yourself. So if the university didn't prepare you, as an employer, I need someone that's prepared. So people are not going to be able to say, oh, it's okay if you only want to work with this small group of people. That's not how organizations work. Organizations are looking for individuals who have the ability to have a level of cultural competency, a level of awareness about their own implicit bias, so that they are not impacting consumers of services negatively, but rather they are challenging them to get to go. My charge to the university is to provide coursework on disparities, social determinants of health, and health equity. I know we cover it in some classes, but I'm saying we have to prepare these young people for the true workforce. And Ohio is very diverse, and we have to make a commitment to ensuring that they are where they need to be. Coursework on cultural and linguistic competency and implicit bias, providing overviews of federal data and state data on disease incidents and what populations they're going to be engaging with and whether or not they're prepared. We're trying to prepare you to have a wonderful transition into your career. So we have opportunities to set a healthcare agenda, to set a health equity plan for the state, to expand leadership on this issue, and to improve healthcare access and health outcomes for all racial and ethnic populations in this state. But further, we have to improve the cultural and linguistic competency of those who are preparing to come into careers that are going to touch people. So if you're touching people, you have to have a skill set and make significant progress in disaggregated data. Here's what we know. Asian American Pacific Islanders are often seen as one of the healthiest groups in the country. And this is an unfortunate misnomer because we don't disaggregate data. If we were to disaggregate data, we would see that Vietnamese women have cervical cancer at 5 times the rate of white women. But because everybody is put into the pot, and everybody, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Nepali, the Bhutanese, it doesn't matter, you're going in this pot, and so all your health outcomes come in this pot. Same for Latinos and Dominican Republic, Puerto Rican, Mexican, this is in this pot. And so when we look at statistics in this state and they say black, white, other, how many of you know other does not get funded? There's no funding line for other. And so we have to really push for disaggregated data so we have opportunities to prevent disease rather than treating it. We are all caught up, if you will, in the inescapable network of mutuality, tied in this single garment of destiny. And the reality is whatever affects one directly affects one indirectly. So I honor the place in you where the universe resides, that place of love, that place of peace, the place of service, and the place of joy. And when you are there, and I am there, then we are one. Namaste. Peace unto you. Thank you.
No, this is open. You can say open. Everybody can.
Okay. I think I'm talking here. No, I live in Columbus, Ohio, this morning. But I want to introduce you to Ms. Holly. She's me here.
Okay.
I extension of my local office of minority health. So she is me and I wonderful, but I do have to
Does anybody have any questions?
Any questions? How you doing? Thanks for my amen. I felt you. I felt you. He was amen. I felt you. Wonderful. Thank you again. I appreciate the opportunity.
People there that have
I'm just curious about the in youth. So is there data, similar data in youth versus kind of
Which part of us?
So that,
Pick it
so
up.
actually we have, a new category. So the picture of the man. One population group and they just daily about it. And what we will find,
That's why none of them well, yeah, come on, someone. Jody's and Jody has 450 students in the semester. So